Welcome, everyone. So, Thanksgiving's coming up. I thought we could talk about it today because we're probably all going to be having a similar day on Thanksgiving. And we're supposed to be applying the teachings of the Buddha to every day of our lives. But we all have different experiences, and sometimes it's not easy to speak to every single person's experience. But on Thanksgiving, we all have a pretty similar experience. So it's something that we can all contemplate together, how we're all going to be acting in accord with our values on this one day. So, does everyone have plans for Thanksgiving? Does everyone have their Thanksgiving plans set? Yeah? No? Some don't still? Are people celebrating with family or family mostly? Yeah? And then friends? Anyone doing a Friendsgiving? Yeah, a Friendsgiving? Or I know there's like a community Thanksgiving a lot of times, the Sangha Thanksgiving. Anyone? Yeah. Is anyone traveling? Yeah? Oh, wow, a lot of people traveling. Flying or driving? Both? Okay. Yeah. What about, is anyone responsible for cooking the turkey? You are? Okay, you're a brave soul. Just start that really early in the day, right? Yeah. I've never done that before. It's a big responsibility. So, there's a lot to do at Thanksgiving. We host all of these people at our home. We make a big feast. All of this requires a lot of coordination and communication, and hopefully the people we're communicating with are people that we love and get along with, but sometimes it's still not that easy. Or you're traveling, you're flying or driving, and that's a lot of work. That's exhausting. Some people really enjoy the time with their families. Some people not so much. For some people it can be a really difficult time, either because they have a toxic family dynamic, or maybe Thanksgiving reminds you of someone that you've lost, or perhaps you don't have anyone to spend it with. So there are many different types of experiences that we might have on this day. But I thought we would talk about today because we can then be prepared. We can have in our mind a game plan for how we can be prepared to act accordingly on this day. You know, if you don't plan ahead, then you show up and you do the best you can with whatever you know, whatever you've got in your mind. And that doesn't usually work out too well for us because we usually forget to do anything worthwhile and to act with our values. And we usually, forget just all of the ways that we could be doing better. And so if we think ahead, then maybe we'll be a little bit more prepared once this day comes. So the way I see it, there's only really 3 options for the way Thanksgiving goes usually. First option is you have a great time. You eat tons of food, you stuff your belly, you watch football or you don't, you spend the holiday with people that you love, who you're attached to, and you get super attached to this temporary bliss experience, and you forget all about your true nature and the precious opportunity of this life. You have a holiday from everything. Or you have a terrible time. You spend the holiday self-absorbed and mired in negative emotions and negative actions and arguing with people or speaking with your relatives in a divisive way, and forgetting all about your true nature and the precious opportunity of this life. And we could call that the hella-day option. And then option 3 is some mix of those two, some holiday, some hella-day. So, but I think there's a 4th option. And the 4th option is one in which we maintain our spiritual focus and the integrity of our good hearts, one in which the holiday becomes an invitation for spiritual practice instead of a distraction from it. So you may be here today because you're just curious. Maybe you are interested in Buddhism and want to explore it further. Maybe you're interested in becoming a Buddhist. Maybe you're not interested in becoming a Buddhist, but you like hearing other different spiritual perspectives. You like learning about all things from all places. Or maybe you're already Buddhist and you want to go a little deeper in your practice or learn how to apply these things to your daily life. Whichever one of these is true for you, I bet that your real reason for being here today, the deeper reason, is that you want to find a way out of suffering, not only for yourself, but for others. We are so fortunate to even be able to have a thought like that. If we were warthogs or toads or turkeys, we would not be able to think like that. And if we were born in the hell realms or the realm of the hungry ghosts, we wouldn't be able to think like that. We'd be too consumed with the experience of our own suffering to think about anything beyond our experience of suffering. To even think that there might be a way out, or to think that there may be a way to help others. If we were born in the God realms, we wouldn't be thinking that way either. We'd be blissed out by our own opulence and pleasure, and we wouldn't be thinking of spiritual practice at all. At least not until the end of our lives, and then everything sags and wilts, and we would regret that we didn't spend our lives considering this. If we were born in a place where there were no spiritual seekers, where there was no one to teach us compassion or even just basic human kindness, then the thought of helping others wouldn't cross our minds. We would have no exposure to that kind of thinking. If we were born with mental deficiencies that severely impeded our ability to think and learn, we wouldn't be able to conceive of these concepts either. If we were living in a war zone or a place stricken by famine, we might wish for an end to the suffering that we're experiencing, and we could see the suffering of others, and maybe we would wish for our suffering and the suffering of others to end. But because of the circumstances of our lives, because we would be suffering to such an extreme level, we wouldn't have the freedom to seek any kind of spiritual path. We wouldn't be able to seek a way out of suffering. All we could do is think about our next meal or hide from the next bomb. But we do have the freedom. Here we are. We are looking for a way out of suffering for ourselves and others. The only reason that we have the freedom to do that, to even consider the idea, to even hear the word compassion, is because we have accumulated the causes for it. We have committed virtuous actions in our past lives. And because of those virtuous actions, we have created the causes to be able to hear the word compassion, to see examples of compassion, to learn how to be compassionate. And by acting virtuously and cultivating compassion, we created those causes in which we've created the causes for this rare and precious human life in which we can seek a way out of suffering, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. We can attain supreme enlightenment, and we can help others do the same. Jetsunma says, "Somehow you have found yourself in this fortunate, amazing position where this feast of possibility is laid before you. How did you come to this point? How is it possible that you have this option? You must have done something right in the past, and I suggest that you now build on it. If you don't cultivate the mind of extraordinary compassion and such a burning love that compassion is the most important force in your life, then the natural inclinations of a mind filled with desire will overcome you. This is Kali Yuga, the age of degeneration, and that's how it is. You must practice and cultivate that mind of compassion, of love, so thoroughly that you are moved to the core by even the faint possibility that you might achieve liberation in order to benefit beings. You think of nothing else. You must cultivate that until you burn with it. Don't be afraid of that kind of love." So how can we use this Thanksgiving holiday to cultivate that kind of love, to cultivate that burning love, that heart of compassion? How can we use the opportunities of this one day to do that? So I decided to have some fun with this, and I put together a simple playbook, which, Kelly, if you wouldn't mind, maybe, I don't know if someone else could help pass them out. There's 2 handouts today, actually. I can hand out both of them. So I personally don't watch sports ball, but I understand that that's a thing people do on Thanksgiving. And I thought it'd be fun to come up with a playbook, and hopefully the metaphors work in some aspect, because I don't know anything about football. So hopefully my playbook metaphors work. We'll see. And for those of you who are watching online, the handouts for today's class are uploaded to the Facebook event page, so you can access them there. Hopefully there's enough for everyone. If not, we can share, right? I think most people have them now. Yeah.
Would a touchdown be enlightenment itself?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. All right, we're good? All right. So until we are enlightened, the obscurations of our minds will fight the idea of compassion. Because it's not our habit. Our habits are going to work against us because we have very, very entrenched habits of thinking of ourselves. And so we're going to be up against that resistance for a while. This is why Jetsunma says that we must cultivate the idea of compassion every day, as though it were a delicate orchid that could die in an unnatural environment. And the way that we do that is by contemplating suffering. And I know, spending Thanksgiving thinking about the awfulness of existence doesn't sound like much fun, but it actually will lead to joy, ultimately. Why would anyone want to contemplate suffering when they could just drink beer and watch football and not think about suffering, though? Contemplating suffering is like sobering up at a party. We're not trying to make ourselves depressed. We're trying to just see things as they are. You can still drink beer, eat food, and watch football, but you look at it a little bit differently, recognizing the transient nature of these joys, recognizing that none of them are going to take you anywhere worth going, and that they're not really worth anything other than this one moment's happiness. You can watch the parade, cook the turkey, and bake the pies while recognizing the pervasive suffering of your experience. For instance, let's consider the pervasive suffering of Thanksgiving. First, there's the fictitious story of the holiday. There is apparently, I did some Google research, there is apparently some historical evidence that the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags shared a meal together in 1621, but it's not clear why. So these pilgrims had taken over an indigenous town that had been, all of the native inhabitants had died of a plague. And then the pilgrims found this abandoned town and took it over, and that's where the first Thanksgiving happened. Sounds great, right? Yay! We don't really know why they were like if they did have this meal together, we don't know exactly why. It's possible that that the chief of the Wampanoags was out making some calls. It's possible that there's a story that the Native Americans helped the Pilgrims with their harvest. That may have happened, maybe not. All we really know is that there was venison because that's what everyone wrote in their diaries about. That's all anyone really documented about the day. So despite the Kumbaya version of events in children's textbooks, we know that the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans was quite violent. And even if there was this one shared meal, generally it's in the context of quite a lot of violence. There are accounts of the Pilgrims holding other Thanksgiving celebrations after massacring entire villages. There was one instance when they slaughtered about 500 men, women, and children, burned down an entire village, and then held a Thanksgiving celebration afterwards for their good fortune. So, yeah. So what are we really celebrating here? This day is steeped in indigenous blood, in plagues, in stolen land, and broken treaties, built on lies. And we tell a story every year to our children about this lie of people getting along and having a feast. And this wasn't even really an annual tradition in this country until President Lincoln made it one, like 200 years later, in order to try to unify the country after the Civil War. So we're killing each other again, and then, maybe if we tell this nice story that's kind of a lie, maybe we can get people to get along. If we cover up mass genocide, with this lie, we can get people to stop killing each other now. It's kind of weird. So the holiday is also steeped in animal blood. 46 million turkeys are killed every year just for Thanksgiving alone. 46 million. And just to put that in perspective, the country of Spain has a population of about 46 million people. So that's how many turkeys are killed off just for this one day. You may be vegetarian, but that doesn't mean that you're not still taking part in suffering. There's the suffering of dairy cows, for instance, who are separated from their babies, and their infected udders are sterilized by singeing them with flamethrowers. Yeah. You may be vegan, but you're still taking part in suffering. When the fields are harvested, little mice and rabbits and quails that have made their homes in the fields are destroyed. They're killed. Not to mention all of the insects that are killed by pesticides or plowing. So there's so many sufferings we can consider in relation to the beautiful meal before us. And as we stuff our faces, we can consider the children in Syria who have nothing to eat. We can consider that there are so many people all over the world who have no more than one handful of rice each day. And that's normal. That's their normal life. That's not, right now they're in the middle of a war and they have nothing to eat. That's been their whole life, generations of people with no more than a handful of rice each day. And here we are going back for seconds. But it's not about shaming yourself. We're not trying to think of that perspective in order to shame ourselves. It's not actually about ourselves. It's not about shaming ourselves. It's not about us. It's about getting ourselves to the point that we no longer think it's all about us. It's about getting beyond thinking about ourselves and our desires, breaking that habit of obsessive self-concern, and coming to understand that the only thing that we can rely on cyclic existence for is suffering. So if this is the suffering that is caused by our Thanksgiving meal and we are taking part of that, what are we creating for ourselves in the future? What are the causes that we are creating by taking part in the slaughter of 46 million turkeys? Any joy that samsara brings us is temporary. And usually the things that we enjoy are created with negative causes, like killing and lying and stealing. So even if they taste good now, they will eventually bring us pain. It's difficult for Americans to hear about suffering. is we don't like suffering, and we're really good at pretending it doesn't exist. We don't live in the kind of poverty that causes parents to maim their own children so they have a better chance of begging in the streets. We don't have to walk through crowds of lepers on our way home. And we can take an Uber and watch Netflix and pretend like none of that is happening. In other parts of the world, people know so much more about suffering, about really deep suffering. I mean, we all have suffering in our lives. We all have had injuries or lost loved ones, or some of us may have had experiences of real hunger. Some of us have never really had an experience of hunger. But people in other countries have experience of suffering that are profoundly more intense than what we experience in our lives. And the comfortability of our lives has hardened our minds so that we no longer even want to hear about suffering. We don't want to soften our hearts to the sufferings of others. It's almost taboo to talk about suffering. You might say, well, I don't think it does any good to talk about suffering. I think it's better to focus on the positive and think positive thoughts and try to create a positive world. But I disagree. We have to be willing to understand the nature of suffering deeply and profoundly if we are going to do anything more than just scratch the surface of it. How can you help a problem that you won't look at? It's like being a surgeon who's squeamish at the sight of blood. Like, what good are you? It's not going to be very helpful. Jetsunma says, how can you develop the kind of love that sustains itself? How can you cultivate compassion like a fire that never runs out of wood to burn, that never goes out? The fire of compassion is based on being courageous enough to come to an understanding of suffering. You have to come to a deep understanding that all sentient beings are suffering endlessly and helplessly, and bring yourself to the point that you can't bear it. Cultivate the understanding that even though you know you can't see all sentient beings, you can't feel them, you can't touch them, still you want nothing more than to rid hatred, greed, and ignorance from their minds, because you understand this is the cause of their suffering. You understand the whole dynamics of suffering, why it exists, how it exists, where it exists, how it grows, and at that point you become deeply committed. We have to be careful how we go about developing this mind of compassion. If you examine yourself and you're willing to be truly honest with yourself, you may discover that your goal is not actually to help all beings. You may discover that your goal is to be a kind person. And those are two different things. There's a world of difference between those two goals. One of them is actually selfless, that you truly wish to benefit all beings. And you're not part of that equation. You just want them to benefit. And the other one is headed in the right direction, but it's not selfless, because there's still this aspect of self-definition, and what do I get out of it? I want me to be a kind person. It's all about me and who I'm going to be. So how does one cultivate the truly compassionate goal without falling into the self-focused goal? A good way to begin is to truly understand the nature of suffering and the causes of suffering. If we just look at the symptoms of suffering without understanding why they occur, then we won't be able to address the root cause. We may think that, people are hungry right now. I know what I'll do. I'll get extremely rich and I'll just buy food for all of the human beings in the world. I will buy them food. I'll give them 3 meals a day till the end of my life. Okay, and then you die. And then how do they eat? What about all the animals? What about all of the beings that you can't see? What about the beings in the hell realms? What about the insects? How will you help them? How are you going to help the insects if the insects are killed by making the food that feeds the people you're trying to help? How are you going to address one problem if in addressing it you're creating more? If we try to treat this world in a symptomatic way, it's like playing whack-a-mole. You're never going to get anywhere. If you think that someone is suffering because they're hungry, then you're missing a big part of the picture. because you still don't understand why they're experiencing the suffering of hunger. Hunger is just the symptom, it's not the disease. And you can't eradicate a disease by treating the symptoms alone. It is important to address the symptoms. Certainly, the human kindness of feeding the hungry and caring for the sick must be done. It is very important. And it's so needed in the world. We need more people taking care of each other like that. But even if we fed every person in the world, it would not address that root cause of suffering. And so the suffering will return in new and different ways, because the root cause has not been addressed. The Buddha taught that the root causes of suffering are hatred, greed, and ignorance. And that doesn't mean, oh, these people deserve their poverty because they're greedy, or, oh, that person deserves to have been killed, he must have been hateful. It's not like that. The Buddha taught that there is an underlying karmic cause that makes phenomena appear as it does in any given situation. And this apparent reality that we're experiencing isn't that deep. It's like a soap bubble or a rainbow. It's an illusion produced by our minds. So everything that is seen, felt, or heard is actually the emanation or the result of one's own mind. If we want to effect lasting change, we have to go to the source. We must change the karmic background or the cause and effect scenario within our own minds. It's that cause and effect scenario that is projecting our rainbow-like reality that we are experiencing. And so by addressing that, by going to the source and by addressing the root of that hallucination that we're basically experiencing, this rainbow-like reality, if we go to the root of it and address the karmic causes and effects in our own minds, then we'll hopefully come to a place and we can be of benefit to others as well. It's like how on a plane, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. They drill that into you when you get on a flight. Put on your own oxygen mask first and then help others. So it's the same thing here. We start by putting on our own oxygen mask, and we do that by renouncing the causes of suffering, by renouncing hatred, greed, and ignorance within our own minds. Jetsunma says, if there were no hatred, greed, and ignorance in the mind, there would be no cause for suffering, and therefore we would not see the phenomena of war, hunger, old age, sickness, and death in the world. There would be no cause. This is the understanding and commitment that you should think about and work with in your mind. So what are some ways that we can do this on Thanksgiving specifically? And I'll say, if you're following along in your playbook here, we're on step 3, control the ball. So first we have read the rule book. We're going to contemplate karma. We're going to understand how karma works. And then watching the gameplay is contemplating suffering, because the play of suffering is really, it's following the rules of karma. So if we understand the rules of karma, then we understand how this all works. And then we can watch it all unfold by watching the game, and we can see, oh yeah, that's because this is how karma works. And we can use watching life as it occurs. We can use that to contemplate suffering. And then we're on number 3, control the ball. So we can take charge of our karma, and we can get the football to the end zone, and which is liberation. Okay? So how do we take charge of our karma? So for one thing, Thanksgiving with one's family is a great opportunity to see one's own habitual patterns in action. You may think that you're an emotionally mature, spiritually advanced adult until you spend the holidays with your family. It's so easy for family dynamics to stir up the muck in our minds, isn't it? Our family members can push buttons that no one else can push. So we can watch our minds and we can begin to develop some awareness of our mental habits. In the places where we really just don't have control of ourselves. Maybe we think we're doing so good. Oh, I've really worked on my anger, and I'm such like a I'm almost like Zen now. I'm just like so relaxed and peaceful. And then you go sit at the holiday table with your family, and someone says something, it's like your grandma, your aunt, or someone says something, and it's that one phrase which it's just always gotten your goat, and they say it, and you're like, oh, yep, still got to work on anger. Okay. Don't have that down yet. So we can watch our minds throughout this whole experience as we're traveling, as we're doing our grocery shopping and trying to get through the crazy parking lots and the long lines at the grocery store. We can watch our minds as we cook. What is the intention that we're cooking with? What is the state of our minds while we're cooking? Are you rolling out pie crust while you think up a smart-ass response to your Aunt Sally? Are you fuming over that jerk that cut you off in the parking lot while you baste the turkey? Are you puffing up with pride while you watch your pie rise in the oven? Like, what's going on in your mind? What are you doing? We can pay attention to our body, speech, and mind and make sure that we are acting in accordance with our values in every aspect of our being, and that we're creating the causes that we want to create. So, for instance, we should protect life. We shouldn't kill, which means doing anything intentionally to end the life of another being, whether human, animal, or any other living creature. This is problematic on a day that centers around eating turkey. Not all schools of Buddhism require vegetarianism, but that doesn't mean that any school of Buddhism says it's okay to kill. It's not the case. It's not okay to kill. Killing has very specific consequences. It shortens your own life. It creates the causes to be reborn in a hell realm. It creates the causes for physical discomfort in future lives, shortened lives in the future. But there's a recognition, at least in this tradition, there's a recognition of the pervasive suffering of the world and the fact that there is no perfect diet that doesn't cause suffering. Killing animals causes suffering. Plowing fields causes suffering. If we stop eating altogether, we'll die of starvation, and then we won't be able to use this human life to be of benefit to anyone. And this is our one chance to end suffering once and for all. This is our one precious human life that we can use to really make a dent in the suffering of the world. And so we do have to take care of it. We have to eat. So each of us can think individually about the choices that we make regarding our foods and try to limit the harmful impacts of our food choices. For some, that will mean vegetarianism or veganism. If you eat meat, you may consider buying from companies with more humane farming practices, or doing meatless Mondays, or cutting out beef due to its outsized impact on climate change. There are a number of ways. There are so many impacts of our food choices and the systems that produce those food choices, and so the systems that we are taking part in, right? There's a choice between buying factory farm chicken or chicken that grew up on some organic farm with toys in their pens. I don't know. I don't know if any farms like that quite exist, but Jetsunma's chickens have toys. Not sure if Purdue's caught on to that yet. But we have to start wherever we are, with whatever habits that we currently have in the culture that we currently live in. And starting wherever we are, we can probably find a few ways to reduce the harm caused by sustaining our own lives. We're not going to be perfect at it because this is samsara, and this is something we can contemplate when we're thinking of samsara, is the fact that there really isn't a way that we can feed ourselves without causing harm to others. That's the nature of samsara. That's where we find ourselves. So that's what we can meditate on. And we can try to make better choices. There are other ways that we might harm others with our bodies. For instance, let's say while you're cooking food, your dog is begging. Your dog comes into the kitchen and is trying to beg. So maybe you're rushed and you're impatient, and so you're rough with him when you kick him out of the kitchen, So that's not good. You can be gentle in your interactions. You don't have to kick the dog. You don't have to be harsh with others. His Holiness Penor Rinpoche has taught that sometimes there are non-corporeal beings that spend their lives trapped in inanimate objects. This is like a hell for them. So they can be trapped in ropes or brooms or doors. And so then anytime the rope is pulled, for instance, they experience intense suffering. It's like their body is being pulled. Or anytime a door is slammed, it's like they're being slammed in the door. They have that experience of being slammed in the door. So we can't see this for ourselves. We don't know if any particular object that we are coming in contact with has some being that is suffering inside of it. We don't know. So we can be gentle with all of our actions. We can not slam the pots and pans when we're cooking, and we can not slam the silverware drawer. And we can try to be gentle not only in our interactions with others, but even in our interactions with inanimate objects, really cultivating an attitude of gentleness. Holidays are often a time when there's a lot of drunk drivers on the road. That's another way that we can really screw up with our bodies, is we can drive drunk, and we can put other people at risk. We can put our own precious human life at risk. We can put the lives of others at risk. And so that's a very simple way that you can protect life, is by having a designated driver on the holiday. Don't make stupid choices. So what else can we do? We can practice generosity. This is particularly relevant to Thanksgiving because the abundance that we experience on Thanksgiving is due to our past causes of generosity. We were generous in the past, which is why we have this abundance now. Chagdud Tulku says, generosity loosens our grip on the things we cling to. There is the material generosity of sharing food and clothing and other things of substance. The spiritual generosity of imparting spiritual teachings, of providing freedom from fear and protection for those who are afraid. And the generosity of effort, giving freely of our time and energy, as well as our speech, in sharing, teaching, counseling, and expressing loving kindness to benefit others. Whatever fortune we presently enjoy is the fruit of our past generosity, which we can now rejoice in sharing. So in our minds, we can avoid covetousness. We can avoid thinking of how much we want what others have. And instead, we can be happy for them. And we can practice generosity in our minds. We can practice generosity in our minds by offering up anything that we see to the Buddhas. You don't have to own something to offer it up. You can just, you own your own experience of it. You are experiencing seeing something beautiful. You can offer that up. You don't have to own the beautiful item. So for instance, if you have a relative, maybe your cousin comes to dinner with the beautiful pashmina scarf, and instead of thinking, man, I wish I had a scarf like that, you can think like, wow, what a beautiful scarf, and you can visualize offering innumerable beautiful scarves to all of the Buddhas. One of the ways that we can cultivate generosity, also by offering our food before we eat it. Instead of grasping at it and thinking, oh, this great Thanksgiving feast, like this is all mine, I'm gonna get seconds and thirds. You can take 1 minute, and before you think like that, you can just take 1 minute and try and offer this food up to the Buddhas for the benefit of all beings. So we can do this by reciting the food offering prayer before our meal. And we have a copy of the food offering prayer here. So I thought we could practice saying this all together. So let's say it in English, and then we'll try it in Tibetan. Does everyone have it? Okay. Supreme Teacher, the precious Buddha, Supreme Protector, the precious Dharma, Supreme Leader, the precious Sangha, we make offerings to the objects of refuge, the Triple Gem. Now let's try it in Tibetan. Tompa lame sangye rinpoche, kyopa lama damcho rinpoche, drumpa lama gedon rinpoche, kyabne kuncho tsumla chopa bo. So we can say that prayer before we eat, and we can visualize our feast of food going, being offered up to all of the Buddhas. And when we're offering to the Buddhas, it's not like, oh, I'm giving this feast to the Buddha, so now I don't get any food. Or I offered this feast to Manjushri, and so Chenrezig doesn't get any. Like, it doesn't get divvied up like a physical pie. When we offer something to the Buddhas, we can imagine that it is endless. It's innumerable. This just multiplies beyond our wildest imagination. Just this feast becomes, it just multiplies exponentially and goes out to all of the Buddhas. And so it's not like one Buddha gets it and one Buddha doesn't. And then the merit of that offering, we also offer to all of the beings, all sentient beings. And it's not like, well, I'm just going to dedicate this merit to Gampo and Dawa doesn't get any. It's not like that. We all get the merit equally. So how else can we be generous on Thanksgiving? Maybe if we have the resources to invite others to our Thanksgiving meal, we could do that. We can expand the length of our table, and we can invite in others who otherwise would not have a Thanksgiving meal. I used to know someone who every Thanksgiving, this person didn't really have a family of their own to celebrate with, and so every Thanksgiving they made a Thanksgiving meal, and they invited in homeless people, invited in people that they knew who were homeless. And some of these people were people who you may avoid them. You may know them in town, and you may say, wow, I avoid that street corner because this person's kind of crazy. And this person that I knew would invite in all of those people to their home for Thanksgiving, and that was the family that they chose to celebrate with. I thought that's really beautiful. There was a story recently of a Turkish couple on their wedding day, who they spent their wedding day feeding about 4,000 Syrian refugees. They dedicated their entire wedding feast to these refugees, and they spent the entire day serving food. Even themselves, even the bride and groom, in their bridal gown and their suit, were there dishing out food for refugees, and that's how they spent their day. What better way can you do that? And then the causes that you're creating together are so beautiful. Like, how can you have anything but a beautiful life after starting that way? So we can think of the ways in which we can be generous. If you can't invite others into your Thanksgiving feast, maybe you can bring some food to WUMCO or your local food bank. Maybe you can contribute to a Thanksgiving feast for others. There's a lot of ways that we can be generous at this time. So we can think as we are appreciative of the abundance that we experience, we can just try and be creative with how can we share that abundance? How can we share that with others? So what else can we do? We can tell the truth and be honest with others. We can avoid sowing discord, like telling one person that someone else did something mean behind their back and trying to stoke a conflict. Instead, we can try to resolve disputes and be a force of friendship. We can avoid harsh speech, so we can avoid making rude remarks about others, like calling someone fat or ugly, or publicly revealing the shortcomings of others. I think that's a dynamic that sometimes happens at some toxic Thanksgiving tables. Someone might be like, well, you did this. And, we can avoid doing that. We can try to avoid publicly shaming people. And instead, we can use our speech to make others happy and foster compassionate interactions. We can avoid useless chatter and gossip. Sometimes we just talk to hear our own voice. Or others start gossip with us and we don't even think before we start interacting with them. We just follow them down the road. Like, oh, you want to gossip? Yeah, sure. Okay, let's do that. I heard this thing, So instead we can pay attention to our speech and we can ask ourselves if our words are true and kind and necessary. We can respond to disappointment with wisdom. There's all sorts of chances for disappointment to happen in the holidays. I always think that, I always like holidays there's so much expectation ahead of them. You have these ideas of how your holiday's going to go, and you think your turkey's going to be juicy and your pie's going to be perfect and everyone's going to love it, and you think your flight's going to be on time, and you think your rental car is going to be the exact type of car that you rented, and they're not going to force you into an upgrade, and you think like you have these expectations of the way this is going to go, and you're going to have and all of these family members are going to be present and they're going to get along. But then it doesn't turn out that way. You miss your flight, or the rental car company rented you an SUV, but they actually don't have any SUVs in stock, and so you have to get something else, and maybe it'll cost more money, or maybe someone last minute can't come to your holiday dinner, and that's really disappointing. Maybe you burn the pie. Who knows? Like, there's all sorts of ways that we can be disappointed. So we can respond to those instances with wisdom. For instance, instead of having one of those disappointing things happen and getting upset at it, you might think, oh, this is just like the Buddha taught. I can't rely on samsara for a moment's happiness. How wonderful that my hopes are dashed. Samsara almost fooled me, but it didn't. My hopes were dashed. I'm so fortunate. And when we're dealing with difficult relatives, we can ask ourselves, how can I act in integrity with my good heart? How can I respond to this person with compassion? We can practice patience instead of becoming angry with others. Chagdud Tulku has this wonderful quote, which I really love. He says, "Don't burden others with your expectations. Understanding their limitations can inspire compassion instead of disappointment, ensuring beneficial and workable relationships. Remember that you have only a short time together. Be grateful for each day you share." So when our relatives are difficult to deal with, we can have compassion for their limitations. We can have compassion for the fact that they might not have all of the opportunities that we have to develop our minds, and we can wish that they do have those opportunities. Sometimes people are mean because they simply don't know another way to be. They haven't seen kindness modeled well, or they don't have a habit of being kind, or they have a habit of alcoholism, and once they get a few drinks in them, they're really jerks. It's like people have all sorts of limitations, and whether it's habitual or it's the circumstance that they never learned how to be kind, or they never learned how to be honest or truthful with others. We can be honest for these limitations that people have. We can be honest about the limitations of others, and we can feel compassion for them. Because we know that when people are lying or they're not being kind, that is not going to make them happy ultimately. If people are creating negative causes around us, we can know that that's not going to lead to happiness. And so we can feel compassion. And we can not accrue negativity ourselves. We can have compassion for them and hold the line for ourselves of saying, I'm going to stay within my integrity in this interaction, however that is. Sometimes it takes some skillfulness. And sometimes we're just really not equipped for how to be compassionate in a given situation. I mean, there's all sorts of interpersonal interactions that we may find ourselves in where we just say, look, I'm out of my league here. I don't even know what the right thing to say is. I don't even know how I would turn the situation around in a better direction. I'm over my head. I'm in over my head. So that's where the beauty of aspiration prayers comes in. We don't necessarily have all the tools right now. We're not masters at this yet. And so we can aspire to do better in the future. We can aspire to one day have the tools to be able to act appropriately in the situation. We can aspire to, if we're saying man, I'm supposed to feel compassion for this person, but they are pushing all of my buttons and they're being really rude, and I've had it up to here with them, and I'm supposed to practice patience, and I just can't today. I just don't have that in me. I don't know how you're supposed to feel compassion in this situation. And you go, well, I'm going to aspire to have compassion then. There's always the fail-safe of you can aspire to have compassion in the future. You can aspire to do better next time. So we can make prayers of aspiration with every action, actually. Something I really like about aspiration prayers is the playfulness of it. You can get really creative with aspiration prayers, and so you can kind of go about your day with this, just with a sense of creative playfulness of how could I look at this in a way that this action could lead to something better in the future. For instance, you might think, as I take this pie out of the oven, may all beings be freed from the heat of anger. Or, may all who eat this pie taste the one true nature. So we can tie aspirations to our actions in this way so that even ordinary actions become extraordinary. Jetsunma says, when you get up in the morning, think, as I rise from this bed, may all sentient beings rise from the state of ignorance, and may they be liberated until there is no more suffering. When you brush your teeth, think, as I brush my teeth, may the suffering of all sentient beings be washed away. When you take your shower, think, as I take this shower, may all sentient beings be showered with a pure and virtuous path by which they themselves can be liberated. When you walk through your door, think, may all sentient beings walk through the door of liberation. Everything that you do should have meaning. It's important that your life be understood as a vehicle for practice. It's the only thing that's meaningful, to make this life, which is so rich in opportunity, a vehicle by which you can come to benefit beings. This is the development of aspirational bodhicitta. So one of my favorite examples of an aspirational prayer is from Stabilizing in the Bodhi Mind by Shantideva. And I thought we could read this section of this prayer aloud. Maybe this will give you some ideas of ways that you can come up with aspirational prayers of your own. As long as diseases afflict living beings, may I be the doctor, the medicine, and also the nurse who restores them to health. May I fall as a rain to increase the harvest that must feed the living beings. And in ages of dire famine, may I myself serve as food and drink. May I be an unending treasury for those desperate and forlorn. May I manifest as what they require and wish to have near to them. My body, every possession, and all goodness, past, present, and future, without remorse, I dedicate to the well-being of the world. Suffering is transcended by total surrender, and the mind attains to nirvana. As one day all must be given up, why not dedicate it now to universal happiness? My bodily powers I dedicate to the well-being of all that lives. Should anyone wish to kill, abuse, or beat me, the responsibility is purely their own. Should anyone wish to ridicule me and make me an object of jest and scorn, why should I possibly care if I have dedicated myself to others? Let them do as they wish with me, so long as it does not harm them. May no one who encounters me ever have an insignificant contact. Regardless of whether those whom I meet respond toward me with anger or faith, may the mere fact of our meeting contribute to the fulfillment of their wishes. May the slander, harm, and all forms of abuse that anyone should direct toward me act as a cause of their enlightenment. May I be a protector of the helpless, a guide to those traveling the path, a boat to those wishing to cross, or a bridge or a raft. May I be land for those requiring it, a lamp for those in darkness. May I be a home for the homeless and a servant to the world. In order to fulfill the needs of beings, may I be as a magic gem, an inexhaustible vase, a mystic spell, a cure-all medicine, and a wish-granting tree. May I act as the mighty earth, or like the free and open skies, to support and provide the space whereby I and all others may grow. So I really like this prayer. I think it's a good example of aspirational prayers because it covers a lot of situations and a lot of possibilities. For instance, if you're going into let's say you know that you have a difficult family situation. Thanksgiving is often a difficult time to be with your family, and maybe you know that you're in for some relatives that are going to push your buttons, or you're in for some relatives who are going to be very critical of you, or maybe, I know a lot of people who are Buddhist in this culture don't have families who understand them being Buddhist, and there may be some conflict about that. There may be some conflict that your family doesn't agree with your life choices, or maybe due to your gender, your sexuality, or the partner that you've chosen to be with, or anything, your family may criticize you for your life choices in some way, or you may have conflict with them. You may just have someone who just always, no matter what you do, they're critical of you. So this is great. You can, before you go to your family dinner, you can recite this section of this, like, should anyone wish to ridicule me and make me an object of jest and scorn, why should I possibly care if I have dedicated myself to others? Let them do as they wish with me, so long as it does not harm them. May no one who encounters me ever have an insignificant contact. Regardless of whether those whom I meet respond toward me with anger or faith, may the mere fact of our meeting contribute to the fulfillment of their wishes. May the slander, harm, and all forms of abuse that anyone should direct toward me act as a cause of their enlightenment. So we can say this. We know then we're prepared going into this situation. We're not victims of it. We can prepare ahead and say, I know this is going to be difficult. I'm going to try and set some intentions that somehow this difficulty is going to bring benefit. Somehow the way that I interact in the situation, even if there's nothing that I actually can do in that situation, if I'm completely in over my head, and I know I don't have the tools to really change anything in this family dynamic, I can at least make this aspirational prayer that whatever happens, may it be of benefit. So you've got something you can do. And then there's also all of these beautiful aspirational prayers in this of, may I be as a magic gem, an inexhaustible vase. May I act as the mighty earth, providing the space where I and all others may grow. There's these wonderful aspirational prayers that we can come up with with anything that we see. Any door that we open, we can make a prayer for the door to liberation to open for others, or, for others to walk through the door of liberation. For, even if just as we prepare food for others, thinking, may all beings have food to eat. As I feed others, may all beings be fed. And you can make ordinary aspiration prayers that may all beings have food to eat, and you can also up that a little bit and make it more extraordinary. May all beings feast on the nature of bodhicitta. May all beings enjoy the one taste of reality. You can somehow think of things in both ordinary and extraordinary ways and make aspiration prayers. So in this, I'm calling on our playbook, I'm calling this making a field goal, because my understanding is that a field goal is something that you do when you're in the middle of the field. So you haven't made it to the end zone yet. You are somewhere in the middle of the action, but you can kick that football towards the end zone, and maybe you'll make it there. So we can aspire, even if we're not in the end zone yet, we can aspire to make that goal. With anything virtuous that we do, it's always important to dedicate the merit. Jetsunma says, every time you do something good, use that opportunity to dedicate it to the liberation of all beings. If you pat a little child on the head and it makes them smile, that's a good thing. So you must think, I dedicate the virtue of this action to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. If you give money to somebody, pray, I dedicate the virtue of this act to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. You should continue like that in everything that you do. Make up your own prayer. You don't have to use mine. Dedicate everything that you do so that it might go on and grow and be of use to benefit beings. So in this, calling this, don't fumble in the end zone. You have to remember to dedicate. So you might do a good action. We do good actions all the time. But if we don't dedicate them, then we're we're not really directing that ball into the goal. It's just, it falls away. It doesn't really, it doesn't get us there. So you can run all around the field. You can run around a football field for hours and hours and hours, and it doesn't mean you're going to score any touchdowns. You have to actually direct your energy towards that touchdown, right? And that's what dedicating the merit does, is it's putting all of that energy of that action, it's actually putting it towards the goal, the ultimate goal, which is supreme enlightenment for all beings. So we have so much effort that we put into every aspect of our lives. So why waste that effort? Why not direct that effort towards the ultimate goal? And we direct that effort through dedication. And Jetsunma says, as a practitioner, you should consider these things. The idea of compassion, of living selflessly, of living an extraordinary life solely to benefit beings, to end their suffering, to bring about a situation in which they can create the cause of happiness rather than the cause of non-virtue. If you can live an extraordinary life, not only are you purifying your mind, because that is the antidote for self-absorption, and self-absorption is the cause of suffering, but you are also a contributor to a very precious idea, the idea of a world, of all worlds, free of pain. So I hope this class will inspire you to find ways that you can incorporate these methods into your daily life, even after you've survived the holiday season. We can continue to apply these methods to our lives. And I hope it'll give you some ideas for ways that you can playfully bring the path to your Thanksgiving meal. Playfulness is important because a lot of times you hear teachings like this and you have this list of things you can do and you think, oh no, I have to do all the things. I have to remember to say this prayer and I have to remember to talk like this and I have to remember to act like this and I have to do this and I have to do this. And you get really tight in your mind and you get really crazy. And that's not the point. If you're crazy, you're not doing it right. You're not trying to make yourself crazy. It's really important to have a sense of spaciousness and a sense of playfulness with this. Playfulness is great. Playfulness can only exist if we have a sense of space. So instead of getting really rigid and locked in and I have to do it this way, like have some space with it and just consider this food for thought, some ideas you can play with on this day. So then we're going to end this class with a contemplation. We're going to do the same contemplation that we did in the last class. This contemplation uses both effortful and effortless meditation, which is both contemplation and relaxation. The mind is always moving. It has no choice to move. And contemplation uses that movement of the mind in order to tame the mind. It's said that taming the mind is a lot like taming a wild horse. So if you have a wild horse in a field, you're not going to be able to get very close to it. You can't just run up to it and put a leash on it. It's got all sorts of energy, and it's going to buck and run around, and it could kick you because it's going to try to get free. It doesn't want to be trapped. It doesn't want to be contained. And our minds are like this. So instead of just walking up to a wild horse and trying to put a leash on it and getting dragged off by it, instead you put the horse in a very large corral. And then the horse has lots of room where it can play and frolic, and it doesn't realize that there's a fence around it. And then as we spend more time with the horse and we get to know it, then the horse starts to relax, and it realizes that we're a friend. And then slowly we can bring that fence in a little closer. We can shrink the corral. So similarly, when we want to tame our mind, we shouldn't try to restrain it and put it in a box. Because then our mind just reacts and bucks and runs off, dragging us behind it. So instead we make a large corral of virtuous thoughts. And the corral's big enough that our mind can play and frolic and it doesn't realize that it's contained. So it has this freedom of movement, and that allows it to work with us. It's not going to resist us because it's got freedom of movement. And that movement is its unceasing display, which is our thoughts. In addition to analytical meditation like that, we also practice a more non-conceptual kind in which we let the mind simply relax and fall into its natural state without any contemplation at all. So this type of meditation cuts the mind's attachments to concepts. Its habit of always thinking about the past or the future, thinking of our likes and dislikes, it cuts that. So all of that thinking is like constantly stirring the water in a muddy pond, never letting it settle and clarify. If we're thinking, it's just all the dirt stirred up all the time. And by allowing the mind to relax into its natural state, the mud starts to settle, and then we can work with the mind's self-seeing or self-knowing quality. And to attain enlightenment, we need both of these practices. Neither by itself is sufficient. If thinking was enough, then we would be enlightened already, because we think all the time. And if just relaxing was enough, then we could just take a nap and we'd be fine, but that's not the case. So we need both of these practices, and it's like how a bird needs two wings to fly. We need both the contemplation and the relaxation, and they work together like wings. Allowing the mind to rest is an effortless process that reveals an indwelling awareness, an awareness that is non-dual, not a subjective awareness of an object. That's the kind of awareness that we're used to thinking of. I'm aware of that. But this is a non-dual awareness. And usually when people meditate, they try to do something. But we're not going to do anything. We're just going to let the mind relax at this point in our meditation. We're not going to block our thoughts. We're not going to follow our thoughts. We're not going to judge our thoughts. We just let them be. We're allowing our mind to rest in the spontaneously open space in which thoughts arise and subside. And we'll have all sorts of thoughts about the past, about the future, about how we're uncomfortable in our seat or whatever. We'll have all sorts of thoughts, but you don't grasp at them, you don't follow them, you don't try to suppress them, you don't try to change them in any way. You just let them be. The ordinary thoughts stem from ignorance, attachment, or aversion. And Chagdud Tulku says, their recurrence in the mind stream forms the basis for the continuity of samsara. So instead of being upset when they come up, respond to them with compassion, realizing that this is how you and all other beings become entrapped in suffering. I love this. Thinking, there's a thought, I have to get rid of it, is like the pot calling the kettle black, because they're both thoughts. So the goal is neither to think or not to think. The goal is to reveal the essence of mind. In the beginning, the mind won't stay relaxed for very long because our habit of conceptualization is too strong. Instead of getting caught up in our ordinary thoughts, we can contemplate the persistence of the thought process itself, and we can use that to turn our minds back to the Dharma. So, for instance, Milarepa said that when you run after your thoughts, you're like a dog chasing a stick. Every time a stick is thrown, you run after them. But if you throw a stick at a lion, rather than chasing after the stick, the lion turns and chases the person who threw the stick. You never throw a stick at a lion more than once. So we should be like the lion. Don't chase the stick. Instead, look at the thrower. So we can redirect our ordinary thinking by following this step-by-step process of this contemplation. So we're going to begin by contemplating one of the four thoughts. In this case, we're going to contemplate the precious opportunity of our human birth, of this life that we have, all of the qualities of our human birth that allows the opportunity to practice on the spiritual path. I mean, for one thing, we're here, our bodies work, our minds work fairly well, our speech works okay. We've got, we can read the prayers, we can recite the prayers, we're smart enough to learn to some extent at least, and maybe we're not geniuses, but we can at least learn, and we we've been born in a place where we've all seen compassion modeled for us. We have people who have taught us how to be kind. We've had kind parents, we've had kind friends, we've had kind teachers. We've had so many opportunities to learn how it is to be kind. Just that alone is something that so many beings don't have. So we can actually think about being kind because of that. We have there are many qualities that contribute to our experience of this life, the fact that we have this human life that we can use for the benefit of others. And even just in a momentary sense, if we're having a moment of focus, that's a rare opportunity because we're usually not very focused. So if we are having a moment of focus, then that is a precious opportunity. If we are allowing our emotions to overcome us, then we are not in a space where we can use our precious opportunity. If we're overwhelmed by emotions, by anger, by anger or jealousy or pride, we can't really use this opportunity to its fullest. And so even within this precious opportunity, we have just little bitty windows in which we can really use the precious opportunity to its fullest. So we can think about that, about the qualities of our lives in general that give us the opportunity to practice on the spiritual path. The fact that we live close enough to get to this temple, or we have access to the internet to access the teachings. The teachings are in our language. A couple generations ago, there were no Buddhist teachings in the English language, so that wouldn't have been an opportunity for us. There's so many opportunities that we have, so many qualities regarding our life circumstances, and then the specific circumstances of our momentary experience. So we can consider that, and then consider all of those that don't have those experiences, that don't have that opportunity, who maybe live very close to this temple, but will never make it here because they don't have a car, or they don't know that we exist, or they don't believe that compassion is important, or they whatever, or they're animals or bugs, and they just don't have any human life at all to work with. So we'll spend some time contemplating the preciousness of the opportunity. In fact, this opportunity is impermanent. Our life will end. And so this precious opportunity is even more precious because it can end at any moment. And so we can contemplate that today. And then, once we've contemplated that for a little bit, we will allow our minds to relax. And we just allow the mind to relax long enough for it to remain restful. And once we notice that we've become distracted, then from our restful state, then we'll turn our mind back towards compassion. And we'll generate compassion in relation to what we've just contemplated, the preciousness of our human life, the opportunities that we have that others don't have. So we can generate compassion in relation to that. And then we'll let the mind rest. And then when we begin to lose our meditation to thought, we can consider a commitment that we feel ready to make in relation to that contemplation. And today, I think that I'd like that commitment to be something that you feel ready to make, specifically in regards to Thanksgiving. Let's plan ahead here for Thanksgiving. What are you going to do? How will you use this opportunity on that day, on that one day? What can you do? Maybe a lot of these you're like, I can't, I'm new to this, I can't do all of that. Maybe one thing you can do is just, you say, I can commit to being honest. Or I can commit to not eating meat on that one day. Or I can commit to, I can commit to being generous on that day and offering my food before I eat it, offering food to others. I can commit to doing that. What's something that you feel that you are able to commit to? It's okay that we can't do everything, but it's especially virtuous if we can make a commitment and then uphold it. It is especially virtuous. It's even more virtuous than just doing the good thing without doing the commitment. So if we can commit to something and stand by it, that's good. So consider a commitment you feel ready to make, and then we'll let the mind rest again. And then we start losing that restfulness, then we'll formulate a prayer in relation to the same topic. And then we'll let the mind rest. So, following this process will bring us closer to the direct experience of mind's nature by going through this process of activity and then resting, and activity and then resting. That brings us closer to the direct experience of the absolute truth, which can't be grasped by words or concepts. So we have to experience it. We have to bring ourselves closer to that experience in order to understand it. An awareness of the mind's true nature and the thought process are not mutually exclusive, which is really good news because we think all the time. So it's really good news that we don't have to stop our thoughts entirely, because that would be like trying to stop a bulldozer with a feather. It just wouldn't be possible, right? So we think all the time. Luckily, mind's true nature and the thought process are inseparable. It's just as the sun's rays are the qualities of the sun, they are part of the sun. Similarly, your discursive thoughts and concepts are the display of the pure awareness primordial nature. So we can get used to them through doing this meditation. All right, so Zach, can you check and see if my phone is in my purse? I forgot to bring it up here. I have a timer I wanted to use. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, so since we're doing this together, I'm going to use a timer with preset intervals. But if you do this practice on your own, it's better to do it without a timer. It's better to do it by maintaining awareness of your mind and becoming aware of, at the point when your contemplation starts becoming stagnant, then move on, then let your mind rest. And then when you notice that you're no longer resting and your mind's gotten distracted and you're thinking again, then move on to the next step, go to the contemplation. So that's the way that we should practice this. But since we're all together and we're all going to go at different speeds, it's easier if we just follow a timer. So it's being a little bit practical, but. It's interesting also, as you continue to do this meditation, you'll notice you go on different speeds and different days too. So I set this timer up on one day, and then I didn't the next day, and I was like, timing doesn't work for me. So, so I hope that this is somewhat workable for you, the timing of this. All right, so again, I'm going to cue you as we go. We're going to contemplate our precious human birth, and then relax. We'll generate compassion, relax. Consider a commitment, relax. Formulate a prayer, relax. But I'll cue you as we go. All right, so let's contemplate. Now let the mind rest. Now generate compassion. Let the mind rest. Now consider a commitment you feel ready to make. Let the mind rest. Now formulate a prayer. And let the mind rest. And then we can dedicate the merit. On your handout here, I included some dedication prayers. So we'll do Jetsunma's dedication prayer, and then we can say this other shorter prayer, which I included because sometimes when we do a quick action and we want to dedicate the merit, sometimes we don't have time to say 4 lines of dedication. Sometimes we want to just dedicate really quick. And so there's this other dedication prayer, Gewa Magen Drodruk Kunlango, that's only a handful of syllables, and so that's pretty quick to say if you're in a pinch. All right, let's dedicate. By this effort, may all sentient beings be free of suffering. May their minds be filled with the nectar of virtue. In this way, may all causes resulting in suffering be extinguished, and only the light of compassion shine throughout all realms. Gewa Magen Drodru Kun La Ngo. Gewa Magen Drodru Kun La Ngo. Gewa Magen Drodru Kun La Ngo. I dedicate the merit to the mothers, all sentient beings of the 6 classes. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, yeah.